So, welcome everybody to the next session here of Shift. And I am super excited about this because I get to introduce you to my friend Dima. And Dima has a fantastic story. We talked a little bit this morning about her book. She is an experienced recruiter, global talent leader, has worked in how many countries have you worked in, Dima? We talked about this on the podcast.
A lot, like over 22. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you traveled all over the world, and I think you've also got some really great stories about what it's like to navigate relationships and build connections with people in those different environments, and building teams in those environments. You had to do more than just one-on-one connect. You had to build teams on the ground. And so I really thought you would be the perfect person to come in and talk to us about how to build relationships and to collaborate across time zones, because I think that's going to be the reality for more and more of us as we move into coming back from hybrid work, from remote work. And I just think this is a super important skill. So thank you so much for joining us. I also want to let everybody know we will be raffling off, doing a drawing for Dima's book. I think I just got a note from our producer. We're going to do this after the session, it looks like. So, but you have a chance to win if you're here. So you might get a nice little surprise note from us. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Dima. I can't wait to hear your talk.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. And I'm excited to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is about communicating in a global environment. Before I start going through my slides and giving you details, I want to share with you a story. So my first major global role in a leadership role was in 2008. At that time, I used to work for IBM, and they moved me on an international assignment to Japan. So of course, I was so excited, but also intimidated. I was reading all kinds of books about the Japanese culture and how to talk and how to dress and what colors to wear. And then one day I called my manager in Japan, who was another American assignee. And I said, what should I do? How should I act? And he gave me the worst advice ever. Guess what he told me? Enter it in the chat. What do you think his advice was? I'm not seeing it. So his advice was just be yourself. I know we say this in the US, be yourself. It just doesn't work as well when we're global. So I was myself. Oh, so we have so many people saying be yourself. That's so great. So I went to Japan and I was myself. I was direct. Everything I have done in here in the US that got me the promotions and the advancement, I was doing that, being direct in my communication. If I saw somebody silent in meetings, I gave them opportunity to talk. I put them on the spot. I had timelines and due dates and kept following up on them and all of this. So initially my team, they were very happy to have me. But then after a couple of months, they stopped showing up to my meetings. I don't know what happened. They stopped engaging in the meetings, and if they attended, and if most of the time they would just not show up. And I felt there was just something weird that I did not understand. I thought I understood the culture by reading all of these books. One day I was talking to another American assignee. His name is Mike. And we went to lunch, and I was sharing with him the challenges that I was facing with my team. And it turned out he was facing the same challenges as well, that his team were not responsive to him. His style of being direct was not working. But the problem with Mike is after a week, he decided he couldn't do it anymore after a week from our conversation. And he decided to go back to the US. I knew that going back home was not an option, and that I needed to figure out how to make things work in Japan, how to engage my team, how to be able to lead effectively. So of course, as we're talking about working in a global environment and leading global teams, there's so many different aspects and different dimensions. Today, I'm going to share with you one of them, So let's go ahead into the presentation and then we'll get to talk. Throughout the presentation, I encourage you to engage with me. So enter your comments in the chat, enter your questions, and we're going to have time afterwards for additional questions as well. Okay, so let's get started. So I do a lot of surveys about this topic. I love it, and I always am capturing information from people related to what are their main challenges that they face when they are working in a global teams. So here are the main ones that keep coming up in every single survey. It is the time difference. Some cultures, they're at a slower pace. The sense of urgency. So if any one of you worked with teams in India, you'll know what I'm talking about. It is like not showing up on time to the meeting. Or if you're working with teams in France where they need their time to have their wine for lunch. So it is slower compared to some other cultures like the US. Communication, obviously, communication is a big issue because we have the different accents. We have the different, sometimes we may not understand what people say. Some individuals may use slang or acronyms. The communication style, some of them are direct, others are not too direct. Now, the working style related to leadership. Some leadership, it's more hierarchy. Others, they're allowing their teams to talk and the employees are comfortable to speak up in front of their managers. But also working styles is related to building trust. How do we build trust? It's very different, and gender roles. So here in the US compared to some other countries, if we talk about working with a team in Saudi Arabia, whole different roles related to the genders. And as we're decoding the cultural differences, the one area that I mentioned I'm going to talk to you about is communication. So communication is so tricky because most of the time we may say somebody is an effective communicator or a good communicator. So when I say someone is a good communicator, what do we mean? So go ahead in the chat. What do you think we mean when we say someone is a good communicator? And as you're typing, I'll go to the next slide and then I'm going to keep watching what you say. So when we're talking about communication, let me show you a video that shows how challenging it is as we're working and communicating across cultures. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video.
Mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So I watched this like maybe 150 times and I still laugh every time. So what are you thinking about? And this happens a lot as we're working in a global team where we may have people syncing, but at the same time, there's a lot of communication gaps that happen that we need to be aware of. So now let's go back to our slides. Okay, and I found this one, which is so fun, but it's realistic. So here is a British person speaking to a Dutch person, and I'll read some of them because I think they're hilarious. So the British person would say, with all due respect, what this person means, I think you are wrong, while the Dutch person thinks he's listening to me. Or the British person would say, very interesting. And we'll just say it's a he. He meant, I don't like it. But the Dutch person thinks, they are impressed. So it's hilarious how we say something and it's being absorbed or understood in a whole whole different way. And that's something, of course, we need to be aware of. Now, whenever we're talking about communication, usually we think about verbal and nonverbal. But when we're working in a global environment, there's a whole different aspect. And it is the unspoken rules that affect how we understand and how we engage with others. So in Japan, they call the same thing reading the air. So you're really watching how others are reacting to you as you are speaking. So let me give you an example. It's related to peanut butter and jelly. Every time I see this photo, I feel like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So I have a feeling some of you will have that for lunch. So here's the story. A teacher, an American teacher, she went to work in Jordan, in the Middle East, and she invited her students over. As the students, they were so excited to go visit their teacher in her home. And when they came in, she told them, would you like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And the students said, no, thank you. So she said, would you like tea? And they said, no, thank you. So she thought they don't want anything. And she spent the time with them and then they left. So now we're going to do a poll, and I want to ask you, do you think there was any cultural gaps? Do you think there were cultural miscommunication between the teacher and the students? So we have 37 people said yes. So I'm curious to think about why you said yes, that there was miscommunication. And I'll share with you what truly happened. In specific cultures, like Middle Eastern cultures, you can't just ask once. If you want something, if you want to ask to feed somebody, you have to ask 3 times. So the teacher did not realize that she should have asked, would you like peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Knowing that they would say no. She should have asked it again, and they would say no. And then on the 3rd try, they would say yes. So that's an unspoken rule. Most of the time you don't read about it, where she needs to understand that she has to ask 3 times anytime she is offering food. Isn't that interesting? Now, another example for you. So when I lived in Japan, of course, I read these books and I knew in the Japanese culture, I needed to be on time. So I would attend these meetings and be there even before the meeting time. I would be there like 10 minutes early. And I always loved to sit at the seat that is facing the door. I love that. I love to sit there and see everybody and even watch what's going on outside. But what I realized, every time I would sit in a meeting, the team would act weird and they would look at me, but something was unspoken. And one day it was so bad that I asked the interpreter and I said, what is going on? Is there something wrong happening? And she told me, don't you know? And I said, no. She said, the person who sits at the seat facing the door is supposed to be the most important person in the room. The person who sits to the right and the left are the second and third hand for that individual. As someone like me who was new, I was supposed to sit at the chair where the door is behind me. So there's this unspoken rule, and I was going there as a woman from the US, sitting where the most important person was supposed to sit. And as a result, I was telling them either I am ignorant or I am arrogant. And neither one are good. So that's what I wanted to share. Like, in most of the time, as we're working globally, we need to observe the unspoken rules and be sensitive to them. And there is a range. So here in the US, we may not have as much unspoken rules. And that's more like the low context cultures, where other ones like Japan, Korea, Indonesia, there's so much. It's a high context culture. So there's so much in between the lines and so much that we need to know that are not spoken. So if we're coming from a low context culture like the US, we need to ensure that we're not assuming that the message is contained in, we don't assume that the message is contained in unspoken words. Pay as much attention to what is not said as much as what is said. So there's so much hidden, and there's no way for us to know this unless if we are working there in the culture, making mistakes, learning from them. But if we're coming from a high context culture, we need to know that don't assume anything is said truly has like a deep meaning and hidden messages. And then, and also know that the cues differ across cultures. So just the way you do things doesn't mean that that's the same in other cultures. So that's something we need to think about. And you may not read or find books that talks about this, but as you're working across cultures, keep your eyes on what are the unspoken rules. Another thing you need to keep to be very sensitive about is the concept when we're communicating focused on saving face. And what that means here in the US, if you want to have a conversation with someone, you talk to them. We're direct. We're more comfortable with confrontation compared to others. If you're in a meeting, you say, Mike, what do you think about this? Or Ishi-san, what is your thought? We just need to realize in some cultures, they're not comfortable with that. They would feel offended, they feel uncomfortable. So that's why we end up having meetings before the meeting. So the meeting before is when we're meeting with people, making sure they're on board, everybody is comfortable. If there's any conflict, it's being addressed. And the real meeting, when everybody shows up, that's when, in a way, it's just like, okay, everybody's on the same page, we're fine. But all the work happens and all the conflict happened before in order to manage any issues related to saving the face. So here are some tips, and I would love to hear from you as you're working globally, what tips you got. So put that in the chat. And here are some tips for you. Don't be yourself. Be your culturally sensitive, self-aware self. That's what we need to be. We cannot assume everybody is like us. And we also need to realize that when we're talking about working in a global environment, it doesn't mean that it's working with someone outside our borders. Where there are so many different cultures within your country that's why it's a matter of being curious and not saying, this is who I am, I'm not going to change. It doesn't work like that. We need to continue to adapt and continue to learn what's the best way to engage and work with other people. The other one is listen with all your senses. So observe if somebody looks uncomfortable, or observe if certain body language that an individual does as you're working with them. We need to learn all of this. I know like body language, that's like a whole different presentation, which is so much fun. But we need to realize that the way we interact and our body language may mean something totally opposite and sometimes offensive to other cultures. Find a cultural mentor. So my mentor was the interpreter. Thank goodness I had her to help me. But as you're working with different cultures, maybe you ask your team members to be your mentor. Ask and be curious because a lot of important things are not even covered in books. And then observe your stereotypes. We all have stereotypes, and a lot of them are, we're not even aware of them. So if I say someone who's Indian, what comes to your mind? Someone who is Moroccan, someone from Brazil. So we all have certain stereotypes. So observe the first thing that comes to your mind as you're thinking about individuals from different cultures, and ask yourself, why do you think or feel a certain way? The other one is be inclusive to the international participants. So ensure that you're inclusive, because as you're working with individuals, whether it is over Zoom or in person, you'll realize that some cultures may not feel comfortable. The employees from these cultures may not feel comfortable to speak up in meetings. They may not feel comfortable to be part of like a deep conversation. They may be there listening. So encourage them to participate. Make sure that you're inclusive without putting them on the spot. and look for the positive in different approaches. So, and this is sometimes tough, and especially when we talk about things that would bother us. So, in my situation, I am very bothered when somebody is late to a meeting. I just don't like it. And I realized whenever I worked with my team in India, they were always late. They have their own Indian time. So if the meeting starts at 10, they would show up at like maybe 10:20, 10:25, and I would be so mad. But I'm not saying that is okay. It's a matter of helping me understand what is the positive of not being so intense related to time, always being stressed of being on time. To them, they're not as stressed. So it's like to think about the positives and to of course continue to encourage people to be on time and have fun. It's so much fun working with teams from different cultures. We get to learn about ourselves. We get to, it creates that childish curiosity in us to learn about them, to learn about what's the best way to communicate with them, to learn about their history and their beautiful traditions, which is so great. So if you want to learn more and more, here are some books that I recommend, and I have I have it right here. Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. They changed the book cover to red from my book cover, and it's mainly giving you information about I want to say 60 countries related to what is the best way to communicate. How do they perceive time? What's the best way to build trust? So I totally recommend it. And finally, now I'm not seeing the thing. The last slide had my contact information, but for some reason I'm unable to go there. So it was a pleasure to talk with you, and I know we have time now to chit chat and get to answer your questions.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. There we go. Michael saves the day. So while you guys are taking down Dima's contact information, which I encourage you to do and follow up with all of her awesome work, what kind of questions do you have? Let's take a look. So, actually, this is interesting. Devin mentioned having a mentor, like that she had a mentor when she worked abroad. Is that something, Dima, that you would recommend? And how would you find such a mentor if you've been assigned abroad like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the tips I shared earlier as well. Cultural mentoring is so important because they're able to help us see things that we don't even realize. So yes, get a cultural mentor. That could be one of your team members. In my situation, it was the interpreter.
Talk to me a little bit about your first job. Like, I will always like to ask this, like, tell me about the first time, because you have an interesting family background, which again, I want everyone to read the book. You should just read the book. Like, Dima's story is wild. But talk to me about the first job that you got, and what was that like, and how you, like, the things that you sort of learned about that. What'd you do?
Yeah, I love this question because it has a global element to it too.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a teller at Bank of America. And in my culture, the Middle Eastern culture, we were taught early on not to smile. So you don't smile in public. People would think you're crazy if you smile. So just be serious. So I was a teller, and I would be very serious, standing doing the transaction. And my manager would be like, Dima, smile, smile. And it would be difficult for me. So she would have happy sticky notes all over my computer. And sometimes she would go on the back of the line, smiling and acting like a clown to make me laugh. But that's interesting. Yes, a teller that was not smiling and looking so serious. And part of my transformation is to learn how to smile in public and be okay with that, knowing that people will not think that I'm crazy.
That is such an American thing, right? To walk around and like to value smiling, like you're just always supposed to be like whatever. It's actually, to me, like it reads as kind of aggressive, like whenever you encounter it in like other contexts and other cultures. It's like, oh, there's the American smiling. I always find that's so true. And it's interesting too how some of these things even apply within our own country. So I mean, you chose to live in Baton Rouge, the same city that I live in. So you came into what I think is the most indirect culture, high context culture in the US. So yeah. Has anybody, when was the first time you heard somebody say, bless your heart?
I was just going, yeah. Yes, bless your heart. Or they would say, hey, sugar. So,
did you know right away that when somebody said bless your heart, that they were not, in fact, blessing their heart? That was like the worst insult. Oh, bless your heart.
but it's interesting because I love bless your heart, the concept, because I'll tell you when I laughed the most about it. And I'm going to be a little political. So, when John Edwards won last time, and then I think Trump said something about him, and Governor John Edwards said, "Bless his heart." So even at a political level, people may not understand what he was doing, but we do.
Oh, yes, we were like, yep, and indeed, bless his heart. So, all right, so we are all out of time today. It's time to head on over to the next session. Thank you so much, Dima. It's so good to see your face and hear your voice, and I hope that you and I are able to meet up in person for coffee, like in the, actual meetings. I can't wait. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.